Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters. I'm your host Mitch, glad to have you here. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about Commander on a budget. Today we have an episode of Quest for Quarters. On episodes like these, I take you through underrated budget cards that you should be considering when you're building your decks. For these episodes, not only does every card have to be under $1, but they also need to be used in less than 4% of eligible decks on EDH Rec. This show and episodes like this one are possible because of viewers like you. So if you're looking for some easy ways to help support the show, make sure you like this episode and share it with friends. And make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Thank you to everyone who's already purchased our merchandise, it really does help support the channel. Another easy way to support this channel is by using our TCG Player affiliate links. So make sure that you're looking for those links in the description whenever you're buying a deck or just individual cards. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support. Today's first underrated Quest for Quarters card is Jolrael, Empress of Beasts. Currently, she's only 43 cents in Seas play in just over 300 decks. She is a 3/3 human spell shaper that costs 3 green. She has pay 2 and a green, tap her, and discard 2 cards. All lands target player controls become 3/3 creatures until end of turn. They're still lands. Turning any player's lands into creatures is a huge effect. This can be a form of board wipe protection or even a win condition. As long as you've got 3 mana and 2 cards in your hand, players can't wipe the board. That is, unless they're willing to lose all their lands. That's a trade that not many players are going to try to make. In many green decks, you're going to have a big board with a lot of valuable creatures. Jolrael can protect them and make a board wipe nearly impossible while she's in play. Board wipe protection like this is extremely valuable, but she can also be a win condition too in the right situation. Obviously, by turning all your lands into 3/3s, you can swing through with a ton of damage with enough lands. The problem is that with that, you are leaving yourself open to get wiped. Now, there aren't too many wrath effects at instant speed, but there are a few. But if your opponents are tapped out or you've got another way to protect them, you should be good to go. Now, when talking about similar cards, one immediately comes to mind, and that would be Kamahl, Fist of Krosa. Now, Kamahl is over $10 and only sees play in 1,800 decks. I imagine if his price was a little more reasonable, he would be seeing more play than that. Regardless, he's a 4/3 human druid that costs 4 green. By paying a green, you can make target land a 1/1 until the end of the turn. It's still a land. And then by paying 2 green, you can make creatures you control get +3/+3 and gain trample until end of turn. So Kamahl is also great board wipe protection. But whereas you don't have to discard cards for his effect, you do have to pay for each individual land. Now, in comparison, this can be a good thing or a bad thing. With a green deck, it's not unheard of to have enough mana to turn every single land but yours into creatures. But if you don't have the mana, it might not protect as well. It's also going to take more mana to turn your lands into threats too. Kamahl's a fantastic card, and I wish it was cheaper, but both Jolrael and Kamahl have their pluses and minuses. A somewhat similar card to Jolrael, which sees a ton of play, is Avenger of Zendikar. Currently, it's $3.25 and sees play in over 18,000 decks. It's a 5/5 elemental that costs 5 green. When it enters the battlefield, you could create a 0/1 plant creature token for each land that you control. And then it has landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may put a +1/+1 counter on each plant you control. So Avenger of Zendikar is more like the half of Jolrael, where you turn your lands into creatures. Both essentially say the more lands that you have, the more power you have on the board. The main difference though is that with Jolrael, it's much riskier. Regardless, Jolrael is board wipe protection, whereas Avenger of Zendikar isn't. Perhaps the best board wipe protection spell in green though is Heroic Intervention. Currently it's just over $10 and sees play in 16,000 decks. It's an instant for 1 and a green and says permanents you control gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. Now Jolrael is nowhere near as effective as this, but she can be utilized in various ways that can still be very effective at protecting your team. And you can even use her as a political tool as well. Say that one of your opponents is taking over the game. If you know that one of your other opponents has a board wipe, you can work with them to blow up that player's lands. Generally, even if you are pretty far ahead, if you get all of your lands blown up, you're not going to win. Now, Jolrael isn't for every single deck, but let's see where it might be a good fit. First up, there's Rishkar Pima Renegade, which wants to go pretty wide with creatures. So Jolrael's board wipe protection can come in huge for this. Next up, there's Yeva Nature's Herald, which gives all your green creatures flash. So by flashing in Jolrael right before your turn, you can surprise your opponents and come out of nowhere to win. And then Dragonlord Dromoka can be a great place for Jolrael as well. It doesn't allow your opponents to cast spells during your turn, so you're going to be pretty safe when you turn your lands into creatures. Regardless, Jolrael definitely deserves to see more play than it's seeing. Today's second underrated Quest for Quarters card is Glaring Spotlight, which is currently 59 cents and sees play in just over 1,300 decks. It's an artifact for 1, and it says creatures your opponents control with hexproof can be the targets of spells and abilities you control as though they didn't have hexproof. And then by paying 3 and sacrificing it, creatures you control gain hexproof until end of turn and are unblockable this turn. So this can help you out in a variety of ways. First off, it allows you to target your opponent's pesky creatures with hexproof. Swiftfoot Boots is essentially useless against this. On top of that, you can sacrifice it to protect your own team or to help get your team through. This is a fantastic, very flexible card that helps out in a wide variety of situations. It can help you with your game plan, and it can help you finish out a game. Now, there aren't any cards exactly like this, but let's touch on some similar ones. First up, there's Bonds of Mortality, which comes in at just 14 cents and sees play in less than 1,000 decks. It's an enchantment for 1 and a green, and when it enters the battlefield, you draw a card. By paying a green, creatures your opponents control lose hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. So first off, this card replaces itself. Unlike Glaring Spotlight though, you will have to pay for its effect. But on top of hexproof, it gets rid of indestructible too. Also, it allows your other opponents to target those hexproof creatures as well. I would not say that this card is bad, but I definitely prefer the flexibility of Glaring Spotlight and the fact that you don't have to pay to activate it. Next up, there's Veil of Summer, which costs $5.47 and sees playing over 2,000 decks. It's an instant for a green and says, draw a card if an opponent has cast a blue or black spell this turn. Spells you control can't be countered this turn. You and permanents you control gain hexproof from blue and black until end of turn. So this can cantrip and help your spells from being countered. And it does give you and all your permanents hexproof, but only from blue and black. So for that hexproof part, I definitely prefer Glaring Spotlight. And this card was already mentioned earlier, but Heroic Intervention is a fantastic protection spell in green. Glaring Spotlight isn't nearly as impactful when it comes to protecting your things, but still, Glaring Spotlight definitely has a spot in plenty of decks out there. So let's touch on some of them now and see where it might be a good fit. Commanders that depend on targeting opponents' creatures really like Glaring Spotlight. In a Kaiga the Tidestar clone deck, you're going to be targeting opponents' creatures a lot. And for a Kenrith deck like mine, you're going to be doing the same. That second half that makes creatures unblockable can really come in handy too for a Phage deck. It's just a very flexible card, and not every single deck wants it, but the ones that do really want its effects. Today's next underrated quest recorder's card is Epiphany the Drownyard, which is currently 17 cents and sees play in less than 1,000 decks. It's an instant for X and a blue, and it says reveal the top X+1 cards of your library and separate them into 2 piles. An opponent chooses one of those piles, put that pile into your hand and the other into your graveyard. So it's a fantastic X spell that can get you a ton of cards into your hand and a lot into your graveyard as well. Now with this card, you're actually the one who gets to make the piles. So your opponent will choose the one that's more advantageous to them, but you're still going to be getting some good cards. And with the right deck, you can make it so that there's no right choice for them anyways. Because in those decks, whether you're putting cards into your hand or into your graveyard, they're both going to be beneficial to you. And X spells that generate card advantage at instant speed are very hard to come by. But first, let's touch on a similar card that's probably already on your mind. And that card is Fact or Fiction, which comes in at 24 cents and sees playing over 21,000 decks. It's an instant for 3 and a blue, and it says reveal the top 5 cards of your library. An opponent separates those cards into 2 piles, put one pile into your hand and the other into your graveyard. So Epiphany the Drownyard is essentially an X version that's the reverse of this. With Fact or Fiction, your opponent is making the pile, so you can pick the one that's more beneficial to you. On top of that, at 4 mana, you're revealing 5 cards, whereas Epiphany the Drownyard for the same amount is only going to give you 4. Now, obviously, Epiphany the Drownyard has a higher upside for the number of cards it can reveal, but it is slightly worse in most situations because, again, ultimately, your opponent does pick the pile that you do get. But both definitely have a place in Commander and can be very effective in the right decks. And now let's take a look at a next spell with Blue Sun Zenith. Currently, it's nearly $2 and sees playing over 13,000 decks. It's an instant for X blue blue blue, and it says target player draws X cards, shuffle Blue Sun Zenith into its owner's library. So this may only cost 2 more, but it also has a much more restricted mana cost. For certain decks, this can be pretty difficult to cast. Now, this is definitely a more flexible card because it can be a win condition as well. Also, you can get it back since you're shuffling it back into your library. Epiphany the Drownyard, though, can definitely be more effective in certain situations, and its mana cost is much easier for most decks to handle. A final card for comparison's sake is Prosperity. Currently, it's 36 cents and sees play in just over 2,000 decks. It's a sorcery for X and a blue, and it says each player draws X cards. Now, this card can be quite popular in group hug decks, but for most decks, it's not going to be very effective. By helping every single player draw, you're not getting ahead on cards at all. On top of that, you have to cast this at sorcery speed, so you're going to be tapping out a lot of times for this on your turn. Epiphany the Drownyard is a much more flexible card that only benefits you. Now, there is a time and place for Prosperity, but it's not for most decks. And in my opinion, Epiphany the Drownyard definitely should be seeing more play than Prosperity. But now let's talk about some decks where it might be a good fit in. First up, there's Krufix, God of Horizons, which can save up a ton of mana for an X spell, and it has no maximum hand size. Then there's Tasker, who loves filling its graveyard so it can utilize those cards later. And then Lazav the Multifarious is a great fit for it as well. Lazav wants creatures in its graveyard so it can turn into them. Epiphany the Drownyard is not the best X blue spell, but it deserves more respect than it's getting. Today's final quest recorder's card is Weaponcraft Enthusiast, which comes in at 14 cents and sees play in less than 1,000 decks. It's a 0/1 Aetherborn Artificer for 2 and a black, and it has Fabricate 2. So when it comes into the battlefield, you can put 2+1/+1 counters on it or create 2 1/1 servos. Now, most of the time, and what makes this card really effective is creating those servos. 3 mana for 3 bodies is a very good rate. There are plenty of decks that just want to fill the board with creature fodder, and this is a fantastic card for those decks. But now let's go through some cards that we can compare this to. First up, there's Sengir Autocrat, which is just 24 cents and sees play in over 1,400 decks. It's a 2/2 human for 3 and a black, and when it enters the battlefield, you put 3 0/1 black surf creature tokens onto the battlefield. But when it leaves the battlefield, exile all those surf tokens. So the tokens that this makes are slightly less valuable, but again, 4 mana for 4 bodies is really good. Now, if Sengir Autocrat happens to leave play, you also lose those tokens. But for the decks that are going to be running this, you usually have a sack outlet for that anyways. Another big token producer is Siege Gang Commander, which comes in at 52 cents and sees play in 6,300 decks. When it enters the battlefield, you get 3 1/1 red goblin creature tokens, and you can pay 1 into red and sacrifice a goblin to deal 2 damage to any target. So for 5 mana, you're only getting 4 bodies, but that's still a pretty good rate. On top of that, you get the extra utility of being able to deal damage with those goblins. And finally, of course, there's Mere Battlesphere. Right now, it's 31 cents and sees play in over 9,200 decks. It's a 4/7 for 7 mana, and when it comes into play, you get 4 1/1 Mere. And then whenever it attacks, you may tap X on tap mirror you control. If you do, it gets plus X plus 0 until end of turn and deals X damage to the player or planeswalker it's attacking. So for 7 mana in total, you get 5 total creatures. This is an okay rate, but it's still not as good as the others. It does have that attack clause, but I still think that this card is a bit overused. In my opinion, it's a lot of mana for less efficiency. For decks that really want to go wide and create a ton of tokens, it's better for them to be low to the ground. Let's talk about some decks where Weaponcraft Enthusiast might be a good fit though. An Aristocrat deck like Taste of Karlov can be a good place for it. Although it has no death trigger itself to double up on, it does give you 3 things to sacrifice for those other death triggers that you have. Next up, there's Jolrael, Shizo's Caretaker, which is a great place for it. Since it only has 1 power, Jolrael can bring it back each turn for 2 more tokens. And finally, there's Whisper Blood Liturgist, which loves sacrifice fodder. Overall, I think people are really undervaluing this card. 3 mana for 3 bodies is fantastic. And if you haven't seen my last Quest for Quarters episode, make sure you check it out here. But now it's time for me to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your personal favorite underrated card is. And make sure that you're following us on social media for more updates and sneak peeks on future episodes. Links to our social media accounts can be found in the description. Also in the description below is a link to the Commander's Quarters Patreon page, and I just want to say a quick thank you to the patrons who have subscribed so far. There are many benefits to being a patron for the Commander's Quarters, including being able to vote on future Commanders for deck techs. There's even a general level tier where you get your own personalized deck tech dedicated to you. I truly couldn't do this without all of your support, so from the bottom of my heart, thank you. If you haven't already, make sure that you like and subscribe to the channel. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about budget Commander. So while you're at it, go ahead and check out some of our other types of episodes. And with that, I'm out of here. Thanks again and have a good one.